Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Regina McCann Hess, a certified divorce financial analyst and CFP, here to tell us about practical advice for navigating a divorce. Thank you so much for joining me today, Regina.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So, Regina, how do you assess a client's financial situation when they're going through a divorce?
It can be tedious at times. So what you do is you look at all the assets that are in the marriage. So it's kind of like you have, investments and debts and checking accounts and credit cards and everything. And you just put it all on the table, kind of like you're making a jigsaw puzzle. Mm-hmm. And then once you have all the pieces together, you have to then divide it into two separate buckets or two different puzzles, because the two parties are now splitting and they have to figure out what asset is going to go to which spouse after the divorce. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times you're looking at these assets and debts included in there, and you're trying to decide, especially for me, I'm usually working with the women on their side of the divorce. I'm trying to decide what's going to work for them after the divorce and going beyond that. And it's difficult in a lot of times because an asset could look the same on paper, but it's not. So take, for instance, if you have a house that's worth $500,000 and there's no mortgage, your asset number is $500,000. And then you have an IRA that's also worth $500,000. So on paper, the same number, it adds up. Right. But if you were to sell the house and if you held it long enough and you didn't have capital gains, you get that $500,000. But the IRA, if you were to take that money out of the IRA, which sometimes sadly people need to, you would have to pay tax on that money. And that would be, so if you're in a 22% tax bracket, wow, you're basically netting 78% of that. And that's a lot different than the whole $500,000. So you have to figure out, yeah, they need the assets, but which assets do they need and which ones are going to work harder for them? And then sometimes it also is, can they afford to have that asset, like the house? If there is a mortgage, can they afford to pay that mortgage or refinance a mortgage in this environment?
Well, could you provide some examples of financial challenges that you typically see when people are going through divorces?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is you're going from, sometimes a 2-income house, then to a 1-income house. And in most cases, you have a big income disparity between the spouses. One spouse makes a lot more, the other spouse makes a lot less. There's also still a lot of women who, while they're working in the home, taking care of the family, they're not getting paid for that job, right? And it is a job, mm-hmm. But they're not getting paid for that. So there's one household income that's, taking care of everything. And on the other side, that spouse that wasn't in the working world is now trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I pay my bills? I obviously may need to have to go back to work, but I've stepped out of work for 10 years to take care of my family. So I was a professional and I had a great job and a great title, but now I have to go back in at like entry level to get back into the working world. So I don't have the earning power that I did 10 years ago. So there's a big disparity right off the bat between, you had the one household, now you go to 2 households, and a lot of times it's the woman there where the income is going to be substantially less than their counterpart because they have not been in the working world for so long and they have to start over.
I hear about that very situation quite often, and I'm wondering, what advice would you give for a young woman who's just getting married? And of course she's not getting married planning for her divorce. No. Would you suggest that she take the time to go focus on her family, or that she stays in the workspace? Like what?
Yeah, there's an emotional answer and there's a financial answer, right? Mm-hmm. So the emotional answer is, depending on the woman, she wants to stay home with her children and raise her children. And in some cases, they may not have the choice to make, because if they have a special needs child, it's very difficult, and somebody does need to be there with the child. Mm-hmm. But if it's a financial decision, I talk with a lot of what I call kids. They're not kids, they're young adults, but I'm of that generation where I'm like, oh, they're still kids. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, they're 32. They're not a kid. still do it. But I talk to them because they're the children of my clients, and they're getting married and they're having kids, and they're like, oh, it's just cheaper for me to stay home by the time I get done paying daycare. And I explain to them it actually isn't. If they can afford the daycare, they should, because if they stayed home to avoid paying daycare, then they're giving up their pay raises, they're giving up their titles, their advancements, and 5 years goes by and they haven't worked for 5 years and they're back at square zero. The other thing that they give up during that time, it's like kind of the hidden asset that they give up besides just earning money, earning potential, and their titles. They're giving up contributions to the retirement plans because while you're working, you're contributing to your retirement plan. And if you step out of work, you're obviously not able to, except to an IRA, but it's small amounts only that you can put to an IRA compared to what you can put into a 401k or a 403b.
Well, what strategies do you recommend for equitable distribution of assets? We're going back to the distribution of assets between the two ex-spouses, I guess.
Yeah. Trying to be fair and equitable are two different things, right? When you're going through a divorce, sadly, there's no real fair, but there is equitable. So, in some cases, it might be a 50-50 split. And again, that could be determined by what state you live in, because they may decide, hey, everybody in this state, everything's split 50-50. I work in Pennsylvania, so it's negotiated between the divorce attorneys or the mediators and the couple. But sometimes it's a 50-50, sometimes it's 55-45 and 60-40. And you'll see the disparity of the different splits based on the income, sometimes that the one spouse, may make quadruple what the lower earning spouse makes. And then sometimes that higher asset split going towards the wife, we'll just say for now, is equitable because they don't have the earning power to survive on the other side of divorce without that extra asset split, plus hopefully some spousal support in the meantime to get them up and running. Wow. Yeah.
Oh my, at what point does someone hire you? Like I once again, I haven't been divorced, so do people hire you with their attorney, or are you necessary? What CDFAs?
Yeah.
Like at what stage does someone hire you?
Well, not everyone needs someone like me. I have had people come to me and say, oh, here's my situation, can you help me? And I've said to them, you really don't need me. Maybe you need a divorce coach, or, go back to your attorney and these are the questions I would ask, or, in your mediation, these are the questions I ask. But it really is depending on their financial situation. And obviously, the more assets they have, the more complicated it gets. Okay. And so I have had people come to me in all stages of the divorce. They've come to me before they've, reached out to an attorney or a mediator. They've come to me while they're in the midst of it. I've had attorneys call me and say, hey, I need you to help my client. She needs an advocate. And by an advocate, it means I'm using my divorce financial analyst background to help figure out the asset split and which assets are going to help her on the other side of the divorce. Because if you don't really understand what you're getting when you sign that divorce agreement, you can't go back and ask for a change once that divorce agreement is signed. You have to go understand what you're signing, and that's kind of what I help people do. I help them figure out what assets are going to be better in their pile to help them navigate post-divorce life. But I also help them understand what those assets are going to do for them, and what the difference of the asset split and taking this asset versus the other asset is going to, how it's going to help them on the other side.
So how does one budget those? Well, not just the assets, but how does one budget their money after a divorce?
Yeah, starting over, really. And I've had a couple clients who've done such a great job of this. I was actually just talking to a client a couple days ago, and then yesterday I was talking to another client, and we were talking about their budget. And they, it's a lot easy now to get a budget app off of your phone because you can have an app for everything, right? But if you're willing to do the work and like really get in the nitty gritty, the budgeting is the first thing to do. And you can do that while you're still married, because you can see what the household bills are, what's the utilities for this house, and how to, how much it really costs around the house, whether or not you're going to be in that house or a different property afterwards. You can see the general expenses, and hopefully you can obviously, whittle them down a little bit. But if you help someone create a budget, and I work with my clients for that, let's create a budget where we can stay within, your income guidelines. And that way, you get really, really tight for that first year after divorce, because you're just still trying to figure things out. But it also helps you understand the value of money and what it does for you and how it can hurt you if you make some poor choices.
What are the differences you've seen between the women who still have children that, are of age where they can receive child support versus those who are not of that age, so they really don't see any income?
Yeah, and that can be difficult too. So obviously when you have kids, you need the child support because kids are so expensive. And a lot of times child support doesn't even cover the full cost of the kids. So one of the things I do talk to my clients about is negotiating. You have your child support, right? And that's a formula. But you also negotiate the additional expenses that you could share. Say, the sports, the activities, the car, the insurance for the car when they get to that age. There's a lot of hidden expenses that you don't think about. Especially if you're not there yet. So negotiating that into the agreement as well. Hey, we agreed to split these costs, these additional costs, 50-50, whatever the percentage is. Then when we get to the spouses who the kids are out of the home, if they've been married a long time, in some states there's still spousal support, depending on which state you're in. I'm in Pennsylvania, and it actually varies county by county. I'm in a tri-county area, and it depends on what county I am with which rule they're going to use. Mm-hmm. In general, we try to think about, for, how many years you've been married, you potentially could get a year of alimony. So, for every 3 years of marriage, 1 year of alimony. And that's just a guideline. That doesn't mean, that's absolutely going to happen, but it's a guideline where we can use that for negotiation.
Well, Regina, in your experience, what are some often overlooked financial aspects that individuals should address during divorce negotiations?
Oh, that is a great question. I think, most states, I think, do not include college expenses in the required part of the negotiations or agreements. And as we all know, college is extremely expensive. So that, I think, could be part of a negotiation where we just add something into the document where each parent could be responsible maybe for 20%, of the child's expenses during college. And that leaves the child, on the, potentially having to take loans if he or she doesn't get grants or scholarships or whatever as well. But at least it puts some skin in the game for the parents. Some parents would hate me for saying that, but it is a hidden problem that people don't think about, and it's not enforced by the states in the divorce court. But if you're negotiating and you put it into the agreement yourself, it could be something that could help. That's a big expense people don't think about. And the kids, when they get to driving age, you don't think about a car or the car insurance, because that's another. I have a new driver in the house. The car insurance is expensive.
How's that going?
Well, so far so good.
It's okay. Okay. I know my parents, their heart used to skip a beat every time I left home.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, please. Yeah.
Well, what role does financial education play in empowering clients to make informed decisions during the divorce?
A huge role. A lot of the women that I work with, they're smart women. I mean, even if they are working, they didn't stay at home. They're in really great roles in their jobs, but they've a lot of times have given the financial decisions to the other spouse because they're too busy. They're working and they're taking care of the kids. They're taking care of the house. They're taking care of everything. And they're a lot of times also taking care of the adult parents, like their parents, because there's sometimes illness there. So financial decisions are put off to the side, and they just don't have another thing to think about, so they hand that off. So one of the things that I do is I educate my ladies, and I always remind them, like, hey, this is like riding a bike. You haven't done it in 10, 20 years, but I can tell you that if we work together and I talk to you in non-jargon language, you're going to have a better feel for this. And if you work on that budget with me for the next year or so, you're going to be a year or two from now doing much, much better and understanding much more of this along the way.
So has being a CDFA, has it changed your views of marriage at all?
No, because I've been married for, oh gosh, I hope I get this right, it's 28 years this year, 29 years in June of 24. So I've been married for a very long time, and it's, knock wood, it has stuck. But I have seen from some very, very sad cases and some horrible situations, and it's really, really sad. But I do talk to people about getting therapy, because one of the biggest things that will help someone is if their mental health is better and improved, and it also will help them avoid making the same mistakes, and I'm sure in any marriage there's contention at times, and it's not just one person, there's two people in there, and there's everybody's putting something into that marriage, but there's also problems, and it's both of them sometimes, and it's one-sided in other situations too. I would still get married. I do recommend, like, for my younger people, like when they get married, to have a sit-down conversation with both of them. They bring all their assets and debts to the table, kitchen table conversation. And I think if they have that conversation and have a good foundation with that conversation, and then agree to have it, every quarter, they're still going to be part of the decision making, and they're not going to be able to basically check out on that. They're going to be involved and maybe, have some ownership and accountability in it too.
Well, is there anything else on your radar about financial planning for a divorce, or that you would like to put on our radar?
No, just, when you are going into a divorce, there's a couple things that I do recommend people do before they go into that divorce. One is to get a credit card in your own name, because you want to start building your own credit. And if you apply for that credit card while you're still married, it's looking at household income versus your own income. So you can, do that. And then once you get the credit card, only put gas on it and then pay it off every month, because that's going to help build your credit report. If you have any health issues or dental procedures, get them taken care of, because you may not have the same health insurance on the other side of the divorce. And spice up your interview wardrobe, because you may have to go back to work and you may have to interview, or you may have to look for a better paying job. And also with that, look at your resume and build that up as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Regina.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for doing this.
I appreciate it.
I love